Your root cellar is failing, and you don't even know it yet. You think you're being smart. You think you've solved the problem by storing your canned goods, your root vegetables, your preserves in that cool basement corner where nobody goes. You feel like you're doing what your great-grandmother did, preserving food the old-fashioned way, keeping your family fed through the winter without electricity, without modern technology. But here's what nobody tells you. Your great-grandmother didn't store food in a basement that was built like yours. She didn't have concrete foundations that sweat. She didn't have sump pumps and moisture vapor creeping up from the ground. And the cost of that ignorance, the cost of thinking you're traditional when you're actually fighting against modern building mistakes, is somewhere between $5 and $2. 0.000 worth of ruined food every single year. I spent 4 years working with the preservation committee in our community, not because I'm special, but because I made every mistake you're about to make, and they asked me to help others avoid it. What I learned was this. The reason an Amish root cellar works isn't because it's underground. It's not magic. It's not because our ancestors knew something mystical. It's because a real root cellar, the kind built before 1900, the kind some of us still build today, operates on one principle that modern basements completely violate. It's a principle so simple that contractors actively work against it, and so powerful that once you understand it, you'll spend the next month looking at your basement with genuine anger. A real root cellar is not sealed. It is not insulated like you think. It is not trying to trap cold. It is trying to trap nothing. It is open to ground temperature, which stays between 50 and 55 degrees year-round in most of the country, and it never ever reaches that temperature by accident. It reaches it because there is a flow. Air comes in from one place, moves through the space, and leaves from another place. That movement is everything. Without it, you have moisture trapped in a box, and moisture trapped in a box is where your food dies. Now, I'm going to tell you something that is going to sound impossible when you first hear it. The reason your basement is failing has nothing to do with how cold it gets. Most root cellars fail because they are too warm. Not by degrees, by moisture. You're sitting down there in what feels like a cool 58 degrees, and you're thinking you've won. You haven't. You've created a perfect trap. That 58 degrees is cold enough to pull moisture out of the air, and it has nowhere to go because your basement is sealed. So that moisture condenses on your walls, on your jars, on your food. And in a sealed environment, mold, bacteria, and decay happen 4 times faster than they would in a properly functioning root cellar. Here's what kills me about this. The fix costs almost nothing, less than $3. And it's not a product, it's not something you buy, it's something you create by understanding what your basement is supposed to be doing instead of fighting against it. The Amish solution to a failing root cellar is not to make it colder, it's not to add insulation. It's not to buy a dehumidifier and run an electric bill you don't want to pay. It's to make it work like a root cellar again. The first part of the fix is understanding what your basement already wants to do. Cool air is heavier than warm air. That's physics. It sinks. So air that enters your basement through a vent near the foundation line, that ground-level air at 55 degrees, it wants to sink even further. It wants to go lower, and if you give it a path, it will seek the coldest spot in your space. That's where you want your food. On shelves built against the cold wall, in the lowest corner where the air that entered at ground level naturally ends up. The second part is creating an exit. That same air, now slightly warmed by the food and the ambient basement temperature, wants to leave. It wants to rise. It wants to go up and out of the space before it can drop its moisture. You create that exit by having an opening, a simple vent, nothing expensive, at the highest point of your storage room, or at the opposite end of the basement from where air enters. This creates what we call cross-flow. Air comes in from the cold earth. It passes through your food storage area, and it leaves before it can stagnate. Most people skip this step because they think sealing the basement keeps cold in. They've been told their whole lives that basements should be tight and insulated. That's the English building mistake my grandfather refused to make. A sealed basement becomes a humidity trap. It doesn't matter how cold it is at 3 o'clock in the morning if the entire space is damp at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Your food doesn't care about the temperature you think you've achieved. Your food cares about whether water is condensing on the jar. And water condenses when warm air meets cold surfaces, when warm air can't leave. Here's the cost breakdown that should horrify you. A contractor, if you called one to fix your basement moisture problem, would tell you that you need a dehumidifier. They'd recommend a 50-pint unit, and yes, they make them that large, and they'd tell you it'll cost between $3 and $6 for the unit, plus installation, plus electricity forever. They might suggest a vapor barrier on the floor, which runs another $4 to $8 depending on the size of your basement. They might tell you that you need insulation on the walls to stop condensation. That's another $2 to $5. By the time they're done, you're looking at spending what some people spend on a used car just to make a basement not actively hostile to stored food. The Amish approach costs almost literally nothing because it doesn't fight the problem. It uses it. You have temperature differential already. The ground around your house stays at 50 to 55 degrees. Your basement, because it's underground, naturally wants to be cold. The air you breathe, the food you're storing, the shelves themselves, all of that is slightly warmer than the surrounding earth. That difference, that natural gradient, is already there. You're not creating it. You're just opening a door and closing another one to let it move through. To build this in a modern basement that's already built wrong, you need three things. The first is a vent opening near your foundation, at ground level or below, if your basement allows it. This doesn't mean breaking through concrete with expensive equipment. I'm talking about a simple hole. 4 inches in diameter is perfect. You can drill this in a weekend with a standard concrete drill bit and a power drill. Cost, $15 for the bit. The hole lets cold, fresh air from outside or from deeper in the earth flow into your storage space. This air is denser, heavier, and it carries almost no moisture because the ground doesn't produce humidity the way your house does. The second thing you need is a path for air to move. This sounds more complicated than it is. If you have shelves in your cold corner, leave a small space, maybe 6 inches or a foot, between the back of the shelves and the wall. Let air move behind them. If you have boxes of root vegetables on the floor, don't stack them all the way to the back wall. Leave a gap. Air needs to be able to move from the intake vent along the coldest walls and floors where your food is to somewhere else. You're not building a duct system. You're not being fancy. You're just not blocking the path that cold air naturally wants to take. The third thing is an exit. This is where most people get it wrong. They think they need to seal the basement and let a dehumidifier do all the work. Instead, you need an opening, a vent, a window, a simple pipe that runs to the outside, at the highest point of your storage area, or on the opposite side of your basement from the intake vent. Warm, humid air naturally rises. If you give it a place to go, it will leave. If you don't, it circles around and settles on your food. This exit vent can be as simple as a window you open during the day and close at night. It can be a permanent pipe that runs to the outside. If you're clever, you can create a vent that uses convection, the natural rising of warm air, to move air out without any electricity. In our community, we've used chimneys, we've used wooden vent boxes on the roof, we've even used simple pipes that take advantage of temperature differences between indoors and outdoors. Now, I want to be very clear about something, because I've watched people try this and fail because they thought they had to be perfect. You don't. A root cellar that works is not precise. It's not over-engineered. It's not a sealed environment with exact temperature and humidity controls. It's a space where air moves, where moisture doesn't build up, where food stays dry and cool because it's not trapped in a box with nowhere to breathe. The reason this matters right now, before winter hits, is that your basement is about to become a humidity trap if it isn't already. As outdoor air gets colder and your house gets warmer from heating, the temperature difference between inside and outside creates moisture inside. Your sealed basement becomes a perfect storm. Cold enough to pull moisture out of the air, warm enough that the air carries moisture, and sealed enough that it has nowhere to go. By January, your root cellar will be actively destroying food instead of preserving it. But if you spend $3 on a concrete drill bit, drill a hole near your foundation line, and create a simple exit vent at the opposite end or high point of your storage space, you've fixed the problem. You've done what your ancestors did. You've created a space where cold air flows in, passes through your food, and flows out. You've turned a failed basement into a working root cellar. And you've spent almost nothing. Now, the second thing most people get wrong about root cellars is ventilation strategy. You might think, okay, I'll just drill those holes and call it done. But there's a science to where those holes go, and it's not complicated, it's actually simpler than you'd think. The cold air from outside is heavier than warm air. It wants to sink. So your intake vent, that's the hole letting fresh air in, needs to be as low as you can get it without it being below the frost line. We're talking 2, maybe 3 feet up from the floor. That's where the cold air naturally wants to be anyway. It comes in, it settles, and it starts moving across your stored food before it can warm up. Your exit vent, that's the hole on the opposite end of the basement or the high point, needs to be up near the ceiling, 6, 7, 8 feet up. Why? Because as that cold air moves through your storage area and picks up any moisture from your food or the concrete itself, it warms up slightly. Warm air rises, so it naturally exits at the top. You're not fighting physics here. You're working with it. You're using the same convection cycle that's been moving air through root cellars since before electricity existed. A farmer in my community, his name is Samuel, and he's got about 80 acres of vegetables. He used to lose nearly a quarter of his root cellar's harvest every winter. Rotting potatoes, soft carrots, apples that turned to brown mush. He was spending money on vegetables he couldn't eat, and he was frustrated because he'd done everything he thought was right. He'd insulated the space, he'd kept it cold, but he hadn't created that air exchange. So one October, about 5 years ago, he drilled 2 holes, $3 in materials. Cost him maybe an hour of his time. The next spring, when he opened up that root cellar to see what had survived, he'd saved 92% of his harvest. He told me later that the change was like flipping a switch. Same space, same temperature, same vegetables. But now they were actually lasting. The third mistake is thinking your root cellar temperature is stable when it isn't. You check it once in October. It's 50 degrees. You feel good about that. You assume it stays that way. But root cellars live and breathe with the seasons. In early October, it might be 50 degrees. By mid-October, it's dropping. By November, it's 45. By December, it's touching 40. And if you live somewhere that gets real cold, if you're in the northern tier, by January that cellar could be in the 30s, approaching 32. Why does this matter? Because different vegetables have different safe temperatures. Potatoes want to stay around 40 to 45 degrees. Too cold, and the starch converts to sugar, and they taste weird. Too warm, and they start to sprout. Carrots and beets are fine down to the low 30s. Cabbage loves it cold. But apples are pickier than you'd think. Push apples below 35 degrees and you're risking something called chilling injury. The flesh gets a strange texture. The flavor goes flat. So you need to know your actual temperature range, not just check it once. You need to track it. And here's the part that saves you money. You don't need a fancy electronic temperature monitor that costs $80 and needs batteries and Wi-Fi or whatever else. You need a cheap analog thermometer, the kind that costs $2. You hang it in your root cellar, and you check it every week. Write the temperature down on a piece of paper. October 10th, 50 degrees. October 17th, 48 degrees. You start to see the pattern. Once you know your temperature range, you can organize your vegetables by zone. In my community, we call it the gradient method. The warmest part of your root cellar, usually near the top or near an interior wall, that's where your apples go. Your more temperature-sensitive stuff. Move down and toward the outside walls, and it gets colder. That's where potatoes and carrots want to be. The coldest corner, the one that drops closest to freezing in deep winter, that's cabbage territory. That's where root crops that can handle the cold stay. You've just created a microclimate system inside your storage space without spending a penny on anything, except maybe some wooden shelves you built from scrap. You're using temperature as a tool the same way farmers have for 200 years. The fourth thing that kills root cellars is moisture on the wrong things. And this is where people get confused, because we just talked about ventilation and drying out excess humidity. But here's the thing. You want your root cellar dry in the air, but you want moisture on the vegetables themselves. That sounds backwards, but it's not. When you harvest root vegetables, carrots, beets, potatoes, they come out of the ground with soil on them. Your instinct is to wash them, clean them up, make them look nice. Don't. Not if you're storing them long term. That soil is protective. It seals moisture into the vegetable itself. But more importantly, if you wash them, you remove the natural protective coating on the skin. You create tiny abrasions. You open the door to rot. In my family's tradition, we never wash root vegetables before storage. We brush off the excess soil with a soft cloth or an old potato brush. We leave the skin intact. We leave some soil on there. And then we store them in conditions where the air is dry, but the vegetables maintain their own moisture. It sounds minimal, but it's the difference between a carrot that stays crisp and snappy for 5 months and one that shrivels up and becomes bitter by January. The best storage containers for root vegetables are wooden crates or wooden boxes with slatted sides. If you don't have those, and most people don't anymore, you can build them. Seriously, for about $4 in scrap wood and some nails, you can build a crate that'll last you decades. The slats let air move through, but keep the vegetables from rolling around. Wood is better than plastic, because plastic traps humidity right against the vegetables. Wood breathes. Layer newspaper at the bottom of your crate, then a layer of vegetables, then another layer of newspaper, then more vegetables. Don't pack them tight. Leave a little space. You want air to move through the entire stack, not just around the edges. The reason newspaper works better than plastic wrap or anything sealed is the same reason your ventilation holes work. Newspaper is porous. It lets moisture through. It keeps condensation from forming on the vegetable surface, which is what causes rot. You're essentially creating a microclimate inside the crate that's slightly drier than the cellar around it, but not so dry that the vegetables themselves lose moisture. If you've got apples, the strategy is different, and it's where people waste money without realizing it. Apples stored touching each other, or touching newspaper, can develop something called russeting, or soft spots where they make contact. The traditional way, the way that costs nothing, is to wrap each apple individually. Not in plastic. In newspaper, crumpled newspaper actually. You want it loose around the apple so air can move, but it prevents the apples from bruising each other during storage and handling. One person in our community, she stores about 300 pounds of apples every year. She keeps them for 7, sometimes 8 months. The secret isn't anything fancy. It's newspaper, wooden crates, correct temperature, good airflow, and the simple discipline of checking them every month. If she finds one that's starting to go soft, she removes it before it can spread to the others. That's it. The fifth mistake people make is not understanding that your root cellar is seasonal storage, not year-round storage. This is important because it changes what you plant for and how you manage your expectations. Root cellars are designed to preserve vegetables through winter and into early spring. They're not designed to keep tomatoes fresh in July or cucumbers crisp in August. The vegetables that work in root cellars are the ones that go dormant in winter. Potatoes, root crops, cabbages, apples, pears, squash. These are foods that nature intended to last through the cold months because they came out of the ground in fall, not summer. If you try to store tomatoes or lettuce or anything that's supposed to be a summer food, you're fighting biology. You'll fail every time, no matter how good your cellar is. But here's the opportunity most homesteaders miss. If you time your plantings right, your root cellar can feed you from September all the way through April. That's 8 months of homegrown food. That's 8 months where you're not buying vegetables from a grocery store. For a family, for a real family that grows their own food, that's food security. And it costs almost nothing beyond what you'd spend on seeds anyway. The root cellar itself, if you're converting a basement or a crawl space that already exists, costs maybe $50 to ventilate properly and organize. $50. That's not a budget. That's pocket change compared to what you'd spend on a refrigerator or a freezer. The real savings isn't in the building. It's in what you don't pay for. No electricity bill for running a refrigerator 12 months a year. No spoilage. No throwing away half a bag of carrots because they went soft in the crisper drawer. No late-night trip to the grocery store because you ran out of onions. Your root cellar doesn't break down. It doesn't need repairs. It doesn't need new parts. It just sits there, year after year, doing exactly what it was designed to do, keeping food cold without asking for anything in return. I know a family in Lancaster County. They've been using the same root cellar for 32 years. 32 years. They've never spent more than $100 maintaining it in that entire time. $100. Over 3 decades. That's less than $4 a year. A plumber charges that much just to pick up his phone. Now, here's the part that should frustrate you about modern building codes and modern contractors. When someone builds you a new house, they build it with climate control in mind. They seal everything tight. They crank up the insulation. They put in systems that cost thousands of dollars and need constant servicing. And then they charge you $300 a month to keep those systems running. But if you had just one uninsulated, well-ventilated room below grade, which costs nothing to create if your basement already exists, you'd cut that cost in half. Not eventually, not over time, immediately. Right now. This winter. The Amish don't build root cellars because they're quaint or traditional. They build them because they work better than electricity. And better than electricity means cheaper than electricity. And cheaper than electricity means you keep more of your money. There's one more thing you should know, and this is important for next year's planning. If your root cellar is working right, it teaches you something that modern grocery stores have hidden from you for 50 years. It teaches you that food has seasons. That tomatoes in January are not normal. That strawberries in February don't belong. That if you want to eat something fresh and real and alive, you eat it when the earth gives it to you, and you preserve it for when the earth is sleeping. The English calendar says there are 4 seasons, but the Amish calendar, the one we actually live by, says there are 2: growing season and storing season. And your root cellar is the bridge between them. It's the machine that turns August abundance into January survival. That $3 fix I mentioned at the beginning, the one that saves you $2,000 worth of food waste, that's just the ventilation. The grates. The simple adjustment of where air moves in and where it moves out. But everything else you're going to do in your root cellar flows from that one principle. Let the earth do its job. Don't fight it. Don't try to improve it with electricity. Just clear out of the way and let thermodynamics work. If you have a basement right now, you have a root cellar. You just haven't organized it yet. If you have a crawl space, you have the bones of one. If you have a frost line on your property that goes down more than 2 feet, you can build one for under $100. And once it's there, once it's working, it will pay for itself in the first year just in the groceries you stop buying. The only thing stopping you is the decision to do it. Not money, not skill, not lack of space. Just the decision to own your food storage instead of renting it from the power company. This is the way we do it. This is the way it was done before electricity made us forget. And this is the way that actually works. If you're ready to stop throwing money at climate control and start letting your house do what it was built to do, I've put together a complete guide to root cellar design, ventilation, storage schedules, and crop rotation for every region of North America. It covers the most common mistakes people make when they're converting basement space, how to troubleshoot humidity problems without expensive equipment, and exactly what to grow and when to harvest it so nothing rots. The link to that guide is down in the description. It's free when you subscribe, and I update it every year as I learn something new from the community here. There's also a printable storage calendar that takes the guesswork out of when to pack things away and when to start checking on them. I want to say thank you for watching all the way through. This channel is built on the idea that the old ways work because they had to work, and that the best homestead hack is the one that was figured out 300 years ago and never needed updating. If that's the kind of knowledge you're looking for, please subscribe, like this video, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Every week we're showing you another way to feed your family, fix your home, and build your security, the way the Plain community has been doing it since before there was electricity to depend on. Thank you for being here.